Hey guys, welcome back for another episode of Not the Girl Next Door. I'm your host, Meg Reynolds, and today's guest is joining me at the most perfect time in the season of the podcast. As you guys know, if you listened to last week's episode, I talked a lot about how nostalgic I've been feeling lately, how I feel like, I called it the nostalgia epidemic that's going on and feeling like people are craving their youth, these simpler times, trying to connect with their younger selves. And this guest, if you've seen the trend of I had coffee with my younger self, she is the mastermind behind that trend. I have with me today Jennae Cecelia, and her poetry book, Deep in My Feels, is dropping this August. Obviously, she's been sharing a lot about her poetry. Obviously, she had the poem go viral. And so I thought she was the perfect guest to join me in this season of not only my life, but a lot of people's lives. So Jennae, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be on.
So for people who maybe aren't familiar with you and, your poetry, can you share a little bit more about where I had coffee with my younger self came from, like the idea behind it, and, how does it feel to have this poem impact so many people?
Yeah, so the poem originally, I wrote it last fall. My book was in the second rounds of edit, so we were pretty early on. And I had been in a coffee shop and just had this thought come to mind. And I asked my editor, I actually wrote the poem and then posted it on Instagram and maybe TikTok, I can't quite remember, but it did really, really well to the point where I asked my editor, can we please add this into the book? I think it makes the whole book. People loved it. And I think it needs to be in there. And she's like, yeah, no problem. So we added it into the book. I shared it like one or two times in the fall. And then I posted it again in January on TikTok. And that's kind of where it blew up from, was that post I made. But the whole concept behind it really was just the idea of the way the perspective I was writing from was I wanted to create an environment for my younger self to meet my current self and have it be something where my younger self had the person she needed at that time meeting her, and not having, everybody then wasn't telling me the things I wanted to hear. It was telling me the things things are going to get better and don't worry about it. All
just
those things,
old adages that, we are all told. And it's what's annoying is as you grow up, you're like, oh, they were right. But it's not what you wanted to hear in that moment. It's not the reassurance that you need. I think for me, looking back at my younger self, I almost sometimes needed someone to validate the things that I was feeling, because a lot of the times when you're told it's going to get better, it almost just negates and brushes under what you're truly feeling. You just wanted that validation of yeah, this sucks, but it will get better. That bridge of the gap.
100%. Yeah. And so that was kind of the perspective I was writing from, was that. And I know people have all taken it their own different ways, but it was so fun to see the structure I created, because that's the hardest part, honestly, in my opinion, with writing, is creating the structure. Because if going back and adding in the details is a much easier process for me, but getting the overall structure and flow of the poem is what makes it a little more complicated to write poetry. So I thought it was really cool that without realizing it, I kind of had created a fill in the blank style poem where it was hey, this is the structure, but if you take out these words, it could relate to you in your own way.
Right. And I think that's the beautiful thing too about, doing what we do as creatives, being able to connect with people that you would have never thought that you would connect with. For me, I don't know how much you've looked into the podcast, but I started Not the Girl Next Door because I wanted it to be a place for people to go and they needed to hear what they needed to hear what they needed to hear. And I always said, if I can help one person feel better about their situation through my own pain, then it's worth it for me. And I'm sure, seeing how many people have connected with your poem, it's an insane feeling. I can't even imagine. It's probably so special to see how many, not just women, but people in general have shared their stories with this.
Yeah, it has been, honestly, it wasn't until I did an interview with NBC News and they had reported on how many people had participated in the trend. I have no idea where they got this number, but they said it was 16 million people at that time. And at that point I had been saying, oh, like thousands, like it's so cool to see thousands of people participating. Cause I don't know, like I can't go through and like
Right.
tick
You can't
off every
count
single,
everybody.
yeah. I'm like, okay, 1, 2, 3. But yeah, once I saw that they said 16 million, I've just never, ever had a poem I've written reach that level. And I've been doing this for 9 years and sharing
Oh,
a poem
wow.
almost every single day for 9 years. So it's just crazy that just this one poem really took off in a way that even a lot of the poets I'm friends with and writers I'm friends with, they're also saying like, they've just never seen this happen in general with poetry, where it's just kind of takes on its own life.
Yeah, it literally, that's the perfect way to put it. Like, I feel like it took on a life of its own. Like for me, I've been working on my own version of this to drop in tandem with our episode, doing like in a voiceover style, because a lot of my content is me speaking directly to people. And just like, I've been looking through old memories and just like kind of gathering what I would even want to say of like, because it is a good question of like, what would I say to my younger self? Because for me personally, and I'm sure you feel like this as well, like I feel like I've gone through so many different versions and lived so many different lives, like from college me to high school me to the me who took a leap of faith moving to Nashville to where I am today, now having my own business and like getting back into writing and reconnecting with my younger self. There's so many different avenues that I could go down. Might write 20 different versions of it,
Yes.
And so talk to me too, obviously as a writer, you said you've shared poetry for the past 9 years every single day. That's one insane, like in the best way possible, like that you've just have such a connection with your writing. But like, how do you, I don't know if you've ever struggled with like the imposter syndrome or like feeling as though, what's the word? I don't want to say cringe, but like, it's hard sometimes to share your work, especially as a writer. Like, how did you take that leap of faith and kind of get through those feelings and be like, no, this is what I need to do for not just anybody, but for myself?
When I first started sharing my writing online, it was 2015 and I was like 22 years old. I was sharing it only on Instagram, and I had made the decision to just completely wipe my Instagram of anything of the past. And it just became an author poetry account. And that now doesn't sound weird at all based on like how people use social media.
Right.
But at that time, that's not what a lot of people were using Instagram for. So I know
it was that whole Instagram's casual, like it's not.
Yes. And I know people in my life thought I was, one, so weird. Why are you sharing your life's thoughts on the internet? And then two, it was one of those things where it's like, I just loved writing so much. And I kind of just didn't really care what people thought when I posted it. It was just, for me, it's like, I enjoy this. Why not share this with other people? But when I was first doing it, it wasn't like I had an audience. I only had just like the 500 people who've been following me through high school and college.
Right. Like
and
acquaintances, friends, family kind of.
Yeah. And I had gone through actually, and when I did feel hesitant about posting something, I was thinking of certain people in particular about what they were going to think about me posting it. So I just kind of went through and blocked all of those people because I'm like, well, now they can't see it. So I was like,
you know what? Smart.
I know. I was like, they can't see it. It wasn't even like people I talk to anymore. So it's not like it's an awkward encounter where it's like, hey, you blocked. It was just strictly people that have followed me through different phases of life. And I was like, well, they don't need to see this phase anymore. I'm sure there's tons of people out there that are like still blocked and confused why. But
I was going to ask, I was like, did you go and unblock those people?
I think I did. I tried to for the majority of people, but you just forget who you even blocked. So it was like, okay. But that was just kind of my approach. But it is hard in the beginning. And I was just having this conversation with my husband because I've been having so many people saying like, wow, like this is amazing. And not quite saying like overnight success, but whenever you see someone reach a certain level of something or something they've done reach a certain level, like I have all these new people who've come in and now they're starting with me at this point. But there's been so many points before this over the journey. And there's been times where, I'm selling a lot of books, or I'm not selling a lot of books, or I'm reaching a lot of people, or it feels like I'm reaching nobody at all with these poems. And I think for me, it was just, at the end of the day, I am just so passionate about writing. And I think if I wasn't passionate about it, I would have given up a long, long, long time ago, because writing books and writing poetry and sharing stuff online is not overnight thing. Like it took me the 9 years to get to this point. So it's just, for me, I think I just am truly passionate about it.
Right. I've seen so many, like, so I live in Nashville and they say it's a 10-year town. And I've seen so many times that saying of it takes 10 years to be an overnight success. And I think a lot of especially with social media nowadays, it's so easy to compare ourselves to others and be like, oh, they blew up instantly. But it's like, you didn't know how long. Again,
Yeah.
like 9 years. It to anybody who just comes across your poem, it seems like, oh, she did this overnight. Congrats to her. But you've been working at this for 9 years, and it's because you're so passionate about it. And I think that's important for other creatives to remember, is just because nobody is seeing your work doesn't mean you're not a creative.
Yes, I agree.
It's crazy out there, especially because, you're talking about your how they told you it was the millions and you were saying the thousands. Like, social media has also kind of conditioned us to think like even 50 likes isn't enough, but it's like, imagine you're sitting in a room of 50 people and they're listening to what you're saying, or 100 or even 1,000. Like, that's crazy. Like, when you visualize it that way, it's like, oh wow, it's still having an impact.
Yes, 100%. And I think too, with people that have smaller businesses or whatever it may be, whether it is they're sharing their books, they're sharing a podcast, like whatever, it's one of those things where, yes, the likes and the follows and all of that are great, but are they really at the end of the day converting to anything for you? Like, I have friends who and I say this all the time, there's so many authors that if you go and follow them on Instagram, they're New York Times bestselling authors, and they like rarely ever post, and they never like show up at all on social media. I'm like, how do I get to that point where I could just like
disappear?
I'm like, I'm like, how are they selling so many books? Like, what are they doing? I have so many questions. And if I ever met somebody that does that, I need to ask them, because it's one of those things where I'm like, that just shows you right there that you don't always need social media in order to be successful or deemed successful. And so getting caught up in like you said, the likes, where it's like, oh, well, I only got 50 likes. Well, that's still really impactful, and you don't know who you're reaching, and that might get you the sales you need, or the reach you need, or the views you need for something further than just social media.
No, and that's so true. I've talked about this before, that kind of idea before. Had another guest on who, she's a friend of mine, and she's an artist manager here in Nashville. And her and I talked about how people look at songwriters like that. How, they'll see songwriters around town and they have like, quote unquote, no followers, and oh, who are they? But it's like, actually, they have a number one on the country charts right now. You just don't know it because they are regular average people. And I think that is part of the beauty of social media, is it gives the average person like you and I a voice to share our talents and share our creativity. And, I too, I've been a writer for years, but I think, I've been too afraid to share my work, and I've been too afraid to let myself achieve that dream. So what do you say to people too? Because it's something I've kind of realized is nobody is stopping me from fulfilling my dream of becoming an author. Nobody is stopping me from writing that book. I'm stopping myself. So what do you say to other people like, me, who are struggling with that, of like putting those words to paper? Like, where would you suggest that they start?
Yeah, I think for the most part, it needs to just start from a place of, like I said, passion. So one, do you like doing it? Is it something you enjoy? And then two, trying to incorporate it into your life organically. So whether that's, oh, I wake up in the morning and I'm just going to write my thoughts down, or a page, or whatever that may be, in a notebook, or maybe it's the evening. I find it's best. I always encourage people to do like actual handwritten, like writing, not typing. I feel like that's so much more therapeutic. And I also feel like it forces you not to delete or erase or do all of those things, where it's like, even if you scribble it out, at least there's still some evidence of what you've written. But I do think with sharing it online, it definitely is scary. I mean, but that's kind of anything. Like, my scary is not sharing my writing online. My scary is, I don't know how people share so much about their lives online, like their personal lives. Like, I'm like, that scares me. Like, you guys are really vulnerable for like opening up and sharing very personal details. Like, there's so many morning routines I watch and I look at it and I'm like, wow, that was a good morning. And then you go and read the comments and people are like, you did this wrong. You did that wrong. You did, especially like towards moms.
Oh
And
my
I'm
God.
like,
Mom shaming. That's part of why I'm scared to be a mom. I was like, I don't want to be mom shamed. Like,
that scares me. So the writing stuff, it's like, yes, it's vulnerable and it's my thoughts and feelings, but I don't know. It just doesn't scare me or make me nervous to put that out there. But I think if you do have a passion for it, though, just making the time for it, and it doesn't have to be all the time. It can just be when you feel is right. I mean, even for me, it's really, really hard to set up my work week where I'm like, okay, from 10 to 12, we're going to write, because sometimes I just have nothing to say. And sometimes inspiration might spark later in the day. So really just kind of like leaning into the cues that you naturally get from yourself. And trying to write when you're actually inspired, even if it's at an inconvenient time.
That's so important. I'm like, I have like a running note in my phone, and I'm sure maybe you do this too, or maybe you handwrite it, but of like random, like I call them one-liners, like, or just like little blips of things I want to add to the story that I'm writing. And years ago, I would always keep it in a notebook, and like, I kind of miss doing that. But part of me, I don't know if you did this, and I talked about this in the nostalgia episode, like a message to creatives is like, just keep everything. Like, don't get rid of anything. There's so many like stories and notebooks that I can remember in my mind, but I'm like, shit, why did I get rid of that? And I think it's because I felt prejudged almost by people. Like, I had that cringe and like that self-doubt and just wasn't confident in my creativity and skills. I felt like it wasn't, quote unquote, enough. And I kick myself in the butt to this day, and I'm just hoping somewhere in one of my parents' houses that it's in a bin or something.
Yeah.
Like, I could just go look through it. Like, because the nostalgia thing, I feel like I've just talked to so many people about this, and everybody is craving like connecting with their younger selves. And I was wondering if you had any thoughts on like why you think this is like a huge thing right now.
Yeah, I just actually made a post this morning, a poem I wrote about nostalgia specifically.
Wait, really?
Yeah, it literally was
so funny.
It was a reel I posted this morning. I wrote it a couple weeks ago, but then I made it into like an actual video format today. And I was talking about it, and in the poem I wrote specifically about like things I do as an adult to try to feel nostalgic. So for instance, I said like a few lines in there about I toast some white bread and put butter on it and sprinkle it with garlic powder, because like that as a kid I felt like that was fancy. So like that makes me bring back to my like inner child and like childlike self. And then I talked about how sometimes I cut my sandwich into a sailboat shape, because when my sister babysat me, like that's what she did, and that makes me go back to that time. And then I put in a line about if I'm ever at like a party and there's a kids cooler, I'll grab a Capri Sun just to feel like it's like 2003 again. Like it just like those little things where it's like you're sprinkling nostalgia into your life and like your childlike self into your adult life. And I don't know if it's just the age I'm at, because I'm 31. So I don't know if this is like millennial like life crisis type of stuff where
millennial crisis
where I'm like we crave those simpler I don't know, but for me I guess I don't have a answer for everyone, but for me specifically, I think there's just so many moments, and that's what the last line in the poem that I put today, I said I just feel like there's so many moments that at that time we didn't realize were fleeting. And so you don't realize when it's like the last time you're doing all of that stuff. And even for instance, I drove past this place. I live in Minnesota, but there's a place growing up that's called Grand Slam. And it's basically like a indoor bumper car and batting cages and like all of the arcade. And I only got to go there twice growing up as a kid, but it just is like such a vivid memory in my head. And we drove past it the other day and I was like, something in me just wants to go and play at Grand Slam, even though it'd probably be really weird if I went in there as like a 31-year-old with no child with me. But like, it just like was like, that sounds so much fun. So I don't know. For me, I think it's just that fact that we didn't know those like moments were going to be gone as quickly as they were.
Yeah. Like when you're a kid, there's that rush to grow up in a sense, like you're waiting for when you don't have a curfew anymore, when you get your driver's license, like all these moments and milestones that we're like rushing towards. And then before we know it, we blink and we're adults and we're like, crap, I have bills and I have responsibilities. And, I think it's exactly that of like, I almost wish I lived in the moment a little bit more.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because you said the bills part, because there's a poem also in my upcoming book. And I found myself like right when I was writing that book, I had so many nostalgic moments during writing it. So I feel like there are a lot of like nostalgic poems, but I wrote one specifically about like missing girlhood days. And I said a line in there was like something along the lines of, we didn't account for the bills and pills for anxiety relief. And so I feel like we were just playing that. The whole concept of the poem was like playing the game MASH. I don't know if you ever played that growing up.
Yes, I did.
Yeah. So I was like saying how we were like, oh, we want to live in a mansion and be married to this person and have this amount of money. But like, we didn't account for like what comes with being an adult and all the responsibility. We were just blissfully unaware of everything that goes on. So when you said that, it made me think of that moment as well.
I love that. And it's so true though. Like we didn't, you romanticize adulthood so much and then you get to be an adult and you're like, this isn't all it's cracked up to be. Like, yeah, it's fun to have adult money and be able to go do things that I want to do. But like, you also can't always do that.
Yes.
But is there, from your upcoming book, Deep in My Feels, is there a favorite poem, of course, aside from the Coffee with Your Younger Self one, but like, is there a favorite poem that is of yours and you're kind of looking forward to people reading if you haven't shared it yet? Or,
like that you want me to read it?
You can read it. Yeah. Oh my God. I would love that.
Yeah. Let me pull one up. I've been trying not to share too many, but it's really hard because
you're like, you're excited. This is not your first poetry book, right?
No, this is my 14th.
Oh my goodness. Wow. Is this the one that's like kind of like having the most pre-release kind of like pre-order excitement, I guess?
Well, to go back like slightly, I have self-published my first 13 books.
Oh, wow.
And this is my first traditionally published book. So it's being published. Yeah, it's being published with Andrews McMeel. They have published books like Pillow Thoughts, Milk and Honey. Don't know if you're familiar with any of those.
I feel like Milk and Honey almost had its own little moment.
So that's the same publisher. So her and I actually started out around similar times, like 2015-ish, when we both self-published our books. And so I've had success I have 13 books. Out of those 13 books, I've had 3 do extremely well. My second book was an Amazon bestseller. That's what viral and kind of gave me my career. I had a second book called The Sun Will Rise, or not a second book, but another book later on called The Sun Will Rise and So Will We. And Jennifer Garner actually shared a poem from it and put it on her Instagram. So that brought in like a huge influx of people and sales for that book. Yeah. And then my most popular book is called Healing for No One But Me. It came out about 2.5 years ago. It has far sold out anything I've ever written up until this point. So with Deep in My Feels, I'm really excited because I think it's a good combination of all the books I've ever created that people really enjoyed. But sorry, going back to your question about the poem, I have one that I have shared online. Okay, so this is, again, it's kind of got nostalgic vibes, but it's so hard for me to pick like my favorite poem in this book. There's just so many.
Oh, I'm sure you have a million favorites and it changes day by day.
I'm like, okay, but this was one I recently shared like a couple, I think last week, but it says, the loss of a friendship hits deeper than any relationship I've ever been in. The girlhood we once shared were peak times, I swear. Stayed up late to watch the Hannah Montana premiere, snuck into the stash of chocolate chip cookies your mom baked, recorded music videos for only us to watch back and laugh at. Now it feels like I'm supposed to pretend like it didn't even happen, that I wasn't the one who stayed up late with you on the phone when your high school boyfriend kissed another girl, hugged you as you cried after your mom called you fat for not fitting into the same dress she wore at your age, held your hair while sitting on the cold bathroom floor the first time that you drank. Distant memories are all they are now, but one day I hope to get the courage to tell you I miss you and the memories we made. So I feel like with that poem specifically, it again has that nostalgic feel, but also has a good kind of like the coffee poem I wrote. It has a good, like, you're kind of connecting your current self with your past self again and thinking about these moments you had with this friend. Because that is a big theme in the book. The themes are like relationships, whether it's like friendship relationships, parent relationships, romantic relationships. There's a lot of poems like that. And then self-discovery and self-love. So I was trying my best to kind of give a little bit of everything in those areas. Yeah.
Yeah. And I love that poem because it's true. Like it's really sad when we lose friends, like especially as adults. You know, I think a big thing that's talked about, especially on social media, is how hard it is to make friends as adults, and you know how our circle seems to get smaller and smaller. And that's been a big piece because I'm 26 now, and that's been a big piece for me in my 20s that I've reckoned with, is like how many friends I've lost over the years. And you know, I picture it in terms of like who I thought my bridesmaids would be one day when I get married. Like who I see with me in that lineup has changed so much over the years. And it's people that I would have sworn we would always be friends. And, you know, somewhere along the way, you know, you didn't even necessarily have a falling out. You just grew apart and had nothing in common anymore. And it's like, something I always say is, you know, when somebody comes into our lives, the only thing that's black and white is they're going to either be in our lives till the day that we die, or at some point we're going to have our last conversation and we don't even know. And that has made me so much more appreciative of the good friends that I have in my life and pour energy and love into the ones who are giving it back. And I don't know if through writing you've kind of like reflected on your own relationships and like come to realize who truly does have your best interest at heart. Like how is writing these kinds of poems like impacted you with looking at your relationships in your life?
Yeah, it's been an interesting process because I will say when I first started writing and sharing my writing, it was at such a pivotal point in my life because I was just graduating college. So, and I already went to a kind of unconventional college where there weren't dorms, and I worked a full-time job and I drove to classes and it was class at night. And so it wasn't a typical college situation. So I wouldn't say, outside of my husband who I met there, I wouldn't say I had like friends from college. And so then the friends I had from high school, I was slowly losing along the way. And what really started to make me lose them was actually deciding to become a writer and an author.
Really?
Because we would go to dinner, and like, again, I was 21, 22 at this time. So we'd meet up, and I had a lot of exciting things going on, and I was excited for what I had going on in my life. Even at that point when I wasn't even selling any books, I was just excited to be chasing a dream and a passion. And a lot of the friends I had didn't know where they were going or what they were doing, which is totally normal. But I think without realizing it, they started isolating me because I wasn't relatable enough for them. And it was one of those things where slowly I wasn't getting invited to stuff, or I wasn't hearing from them. Or if I did tell them good news, it felt like I couldn't tell them things. So then I wasn't telling them anything. And it almost felt like they were getting mad at me then for not telling them stuff. But I was like, well, I just kind of stopped talking about it to you guys because you didn't ask and you don't seem interested. And so that point in my life was so pivotal in many ways.
Yeah.
And then now it's been one of those things where now entering into my 30s, I have just within the last couple years really, really, really established a good group of friends. And I think there's this misconception of you have to have a group of friends that you can get together. Like all of you are all getting together where it's like, oh, we're all 7 best friends. And I just don't think that's true. I have my own individual, really, really good friends at my best friends. And there are times like there's 3 years ago, I started doing this thing every summer where I call it girl dinner. And I invite all the girls that I know personally in my life. And we have a dinner in my backyard and everyone brings a dish. And they all didn't know each other outside of knowing me. And it's been really fun because over the course of the years, you know, some of the relationships have intertwined where they're like, oh, we have a lot in common, or we get along, or we do this. And it's been really, really nice because I wish someone had invited me to something like that where I can make friends. And working from home and not having coworkers, and I don't drink, so like I don't really go out a whole ton, has made it extremely hard to make friends as an adult. So I'm really passionate now about creating and fostering the idea of like being able to get women together and introduce them to each other and like creating that sort of environment.
I love that. It's funny because I used to do something so similar and I still do it. So growing up, I would always have like movie nights in my backyard where we would put the projector up. And like I can't wait to have a house one day so I can do those things again. Like put the projector up and we all just would sit in my like get blankets and sit in my backyard. And, you know, growing up, I felt the same where I didn't have like a true friend group. Like I would have a couple friends in my school. I was friends with kids at other schools. And over the years, other people became friends because I was bringing us all together. And I've carried that on into adulthood. Like at my apartment, every now and then I'll cook dinner for everybody and invite all my friends. And it's, you know, there is that misconception of like, you have to have that giant 20-person plus friend group. And, oh, look how like, but I kind of look at those and having been in friend groups like that too over the years, I'm kind of like, half these people are not actually friends and I'm not actually friends with them. Like I call them like they're drinking friends, but they're not true deep friendships. And I think part of adulthood is having to redefine what it means to be a friend. Like, what is your definition of friendship? Like for me, a friend is somebody, you know, it's somebody that I can sit on my couch with and have a deep conversation with. Like if I only ever see you when I have a drink in my hand, are we even actually friends? And I don't know if if you have your own definition of like, what would you define as being a friend?
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned the deep part because that was the whole concept behind my book is I've always been told like, I think too deep, I feel too deep. And my husband,
this is how we would get along because I'm like, I can just relate. Like I have so many, like growing up, I always had really big thoughts for my little body. And like, I just felt like I had nowhere to share them. And I think that's part of why over the years, I almost lost my ability to share my writing is because I just was so used to tampering them down. So this conversation is even healing for me. So again, thank you.
Good. Oh, thank you. Yeah, no, I've just always been told. I mean, I, from a young age would say my mom even wrote down a quote I said to her once and had it in her office for years and years and years. I don't know how old I was. I know I was in elementary school, but she had just been contemplating some things and was just, I don't even know what she was calling, but she just kept saying, oh, well, what if, you know? And I said to her, Mom, if you live in a world of what ifs, you'll get nowhere. And she was like, looked at me as her little elementary school kid and is like, how is this child saying this right now? And she wrote it down and she said she kept it in her office until she retired, like on a little sticky note, that thought that I said. But I just think I've always just had these really deep thoughts and I love to have deep discussion. And with some of my friends, while having friends that are very surface level is fine, like my husband and I talk about this all the time, where it's like he gets together with guys and the surface level for the guys is sports. You can talk about sports, but he's like, I get so bored of that quick. I want actual conversation. And I'm the same way where it's like, I'm at something and I'm thinking, oh, like, well, why do you think we exist? And people are like, what? And
I don't want to think about that. Like,
yeah, but it was funny too, because there, like so much of like, you can see so much of my thought process in my writing, because there's a poem I wrote that I got inspired by at a coffee shop where there was this couple I assume was on their first date, and they were talking about like, what's your favorite color? And all, like these very generic, basic questions. And in my head, I was like, I want to know like the deep and dark parts of you, because eventually we'll get to your favorite color, but that's not a deal breaker for me. Like if you say like yellow and mine's blue, like that stuff doesn't really matter. I want to like get deep fast. So that's been great for some relationships. And some people are like, you're just too much. Like you just want, like, I just want to chill. I don't want to think. And I'm like, I'm sorry, but my brain doesn't turn off.
I feel that like sometimes it haunts you. You're like, can I just go to bed and not be thinking? Like the internal, like, I'm like, do some people not have an internal monologue? Because mine is always going and talking. And I'm like, can you just shut up for 2 seconds?
Yes. Especially as a writer, I will be hit with like an inspiration at the worst random times. And I'm like, I need to write this right now. Like, there's so many times where I tell my husband, like, just don't even say anything for the next 3 minutes. Cause like, if you say something, I'm going to lose my thought. And I'm like fast typing on my notes app on my phone, like, and it's all not spelled right, but I'm like, I have to get this out.
But you can decipher it later on. You're like,
yes.
You know,
like,
your
this
own
is what
gibberish.
you meant.
There'll be so many times it's like, I'm about to fall asleep and I can feel I'm about to fall asleep and something will click in my mind. I'm like, I need to write it down. And then I'm wide awake again for another hour.
Yes.
The friendship thing too, though, it is really hard, but I think it's comforting to know that, you know, for people to hear these kinds of conversations and know like, hey, I'm not alone in the fact that I don't have that big friend group or like I crave that deeper connection. And what's something you've done for yourself to kind of like heal those old like wounds of friendship and like just like reconnect with your younger self and just kind of, you know, move forward?
I would say one of the things I've always said is growing up, I never felt like I was anybody's best friend. Like every best friend I thought I had
another best friend.
Yeah, but like they were their better friend. Mm-hmm. And that is definitely a wound I still carry like now where I think about friendships I have where I'm like, but am I actually your best friend? Or do you have other people that you would consider like you would pick them over me? And one way I've been kind of, like I said earlier, with having like these dinners is I also felt like I wasn't ever invited to like the group things. Or it was kind of like if I was invited, it's because somebody else couldn't come and now there's an open seat. And so I've just really been trying to have the idea of inviting all of the women in my life over to these things, whether it's the dinners I host or I had a Valentine's Day thing. And not like making people feel isolated. That's what I've really tried to avoid because so much of my childhood, I did feel isolated or I did feel like I wasn't the best friend or the close friend. It was just like, oh, she's my friend and like I like her. But I mean, even in middle school, I had so many friends where like I was always the like befriender. So if there was like a new kid in school or someone that had moved from somewhere, it was just in my personality to kind of be like, hey, like I'll be your friend, which was great until then they got their footing and were like, actually, I found some other better friends. So I'll talk to you later. And that happened to me so many times. So I think I still have like a little bit of like saltiness towards that. Because I'm like,
rightly
wait,
so.
Yeah, I'm like, wait, but like I was nice and like was your friend and now you left me.
Yeah. It's we all want to be chosen. We all, whether it's in love or like just platonic friendships, like we want to feel safe. We want to feel seen. We want to feel heard. We want to feel chosen and wanted and like we belong there. And like that's something that everybody like has in common is we're all striving for that. And I think too, I talked about this last week about how people, you know, are craving community, but they're not buying into community anymore. And I don't know if you feel like this too, where people are like so eager for friends and so eager for community, but they're not willing to do the work to attain those things of showing up for people, of keeping their word. Like, and it makes it really hard to form genuine connections nowadays because you never know if somebody is just there until you're no longer like can serve a purpose for them.
It's interesting you say that because with this poem of mine taking off, I've had some people reaching out where I'm like, I've had to kind of put up my guard slightly and be like, is this genuine or is this just because right now my name is kind of popping around places?
Right.
I got a lot of messages about like meeting for coffee, which is very sweet. But also I'm like, okay, but what are we meeting for? What are we talking about? And specifically more from like influencery type people. So it's kind of like for me, what's the message behind this? And like, I'm not saying any of these people had any ill intent, but just when you're getting that many people saying the same thing, it's kind of like, I'm just not used to that. So I'm like, okay, I need to make sure I'm not putting my guard down too much where I'm allowing people to just come into my life and do or say what they want to say and then leave when I'm not relevant anymore. I think I'm still like with that inner child thing, I'm still very protective of like, once this is, which like with every trend, like this is, I mean, as it already is like dying down, who's still going to be here at the end of it all, wanting to still talk to me, is kind of the perspective that I'm looking at it from.
Right. Like, but I think that's one so smart and important because it's true. Like, how many of these people would have been supporting you from the jump? How many would have gone with you through the trenches of the, the sleepless nights, the tears, like the hard parts of this job and the hard parts of putting yourself out there? Like, you're always cringe until you make it. And then suddenly people are asking how you did it. And that is something even for me, I've noticed too, like, people thought I was crazy to move to Nashville. People have been thinking I'm crazy to start my company the way I did. And when I started the podcast, it was, I even cringed at myself. Like, I will never forget the very first photo shoot that I did for the podcast. I felt like the photographer was just there for the check and didn't really give two shits about what I was doing and thought I was dumb. And what sucked is he was a friend's boyfriend at the time. Like, I'm not really friends with him. So it like that, but that feeling always stuck with me. And it's something that I am so cognizant of when I work with, when people hire me to do their photo and video. I never want them to feel like I don't care about what they're doing because, even the most passionate people and the most confident people can still be torn down when, you hire somebody, you put your trust in them and then they kind of are like, fuck you a little bit. So obviously with Deep in My Feels, it comes out in August. What is something that somebody who purchases the book, like, what is something that you're hoping they get out of it? Like, who is this book really for?
For me, it's for kind of like I mentioned earlier, the people who've always been told they think too deeply, feel too deeply, who feel like the thoughts that they have are irrelevant to say and that they shouldn't say it and keep it to themselves. It's really, the whole book in and of itself is kind of just a self-discovery journey. And I feel like at every point in everyone's life, we're always on a self-discovery journey. Yeah. Even now, it's like, I'm sure in 10 years from now, I will think completely different than right now. So I'm always on this journey of self-discovery. But what I really wanted the book to do is take people through that journey, whether it's through love, loss, hope, and really have it be something where they don't feel like being vulnerable is a bad thing. And maybe like with just like the poem did online, I hope it opens up the opportunity for people to really just write their own feelings down. And whether they share, I mean, you don't have to share it online, but just in general, like write your own feelings down and really connect back with yourself. That's kind of what I hope the book brings for people.
I love that. And I mean, it's true. We're constantly on a self-discovery journey. And I think life is more fun when you recognize that it is going to be a constant time of discovering yourself and figuring yourself out. Like, the jump for me from 23 when I started this podcast to now at 26 is so starkly different. I thought I knew myself back then. I didn't know myself at all remotely. And I'm sure in a good other couple of years, I'll be like, I didn't even know myself then. Like, I say that all the time. But what do you think too, when writing this book, like, what do you think is the biggest thing that you learned about yourself in writing all these poems?
Ooh, I would say I didn't realize how many things I've actually healed from that I thought were still open wounds, because there was many topics I had to dig very far back in my brain for, because for instance, I know my readers love heartbreak and breakup poems a lot.
Who doesn't?
However, I've been with my husband now for 10 years. So I have to really dig back in my brain and kind of I have to look through old Facebook photos and really go into a place where it's like, what was happening in this moment? Like, let's get back into it. Mm-hmm. And I just didn't realize as I was writing some of them, if you were to read it as the reader, you would be like, wow, that's heavy. Some of the poems, and they are, but I didn't realize how okay I was writing it and not having it affect me or reopen up these wounds or make me emotional. It was more like, no, this is something that happened and I've definitely healed from it, because now I can write from it from a place where I'm not being spiteful or hurt. I'm just writing it because it's something that happened or I heard happen, or a friend I knew had this experience. And it's no longer, I just realized that I've healed a lot along the way, more than I thought I had.
It's like you're almost kind of disconnected from that version of yourself a little bit. Like the emotions and thoughts, they don't hit you the same way that they used to when those wounds were still open. And you're kind of like it's almost like looking like that you're outside of a house and like looking inwards in a way. It's a very
Yeah.
unnerving feeling. I've had some moments like that too. In the season finale last year, I was reading from my high school journal
Mm,
and reading the ways I used to think about myself and the thoughts I felt by myself. It was so unnerving. And I don't know if you felt like this too, like how unnerving
mhm.
it is to be like, wow, I actually used to think and feel like this. Like I can't even imagine feeling that way now. Like it was just
Yeah,
like an almost out of body experience. It was very uncomfortable. I was like, what I wrote these things? Like what?
I know. It is wild. I think about that a lot with my writing too, where I'm like, wow, I thought this about myself and I would never say those things now, but I was so mean to myself. And I also think with like the heartbreak breakup poems, I always laugh because there's people that you've broken up with, and obviously there's some where it's like, okay, I know clearly why we broke up. But
Mm-hmm.
there's some where I'm like, I don't even, like the time has moved on so much that I'm actually not even sure what happened. And if I was to see them out, it's like, hey, how are you? Like it's one of those things.
Yeah.
That's how the book started to feel in the process, where I'm like, I don't actually remember the bad of what happened. I can like kind of, but I've also moved on enough where it's like, hey, all is well. I hope you're great. We're in different phases of life and much older now. But like you
Right.
said, reading back, if I read back some of my high school journals, there'd be people that I'm sure I would have been like, they said this and they did this. And now I'd be like, it doesn't really matter. Like,
Right.
like we're okay now. But
Right.
also,
And like you're like, it's like you can remember that you were hurt, but you can't remember why you were hurt. And you're
yeah.
like, and you're probably reading the journal, you're like, who is this person again? Like I don't
Yes.
even remember, like, what? They were a character in
Yes.
my story. I don't remember them.
Yes, exactly.
It sounds to me like writing is obviously your therapy and writing
Hmm.
is very healing for you. What would you say to people who, are struggling to find some sort of passion or hobby that can help them heal? Because I think that's a big thing too. I've seen and with people in adulthood, it's like they don't have passions or hobbies outside of their career. Like you and
Hmm.
I, it's different. I think our career is also our passion, and we're very fortunate in that. But for a
Hmm.
lot of people, their career is just what pays their bills and they don't have a true passion outside of it. And something I had this conversation with one of my clients the other day. I said to her, I was like, because she still works she's a nurse and she still does nursing and then she does music. And I said to her, I was like, you just need to remember, like, just because you are still a nurse does not mean you are not also a musician and a creative and
Hmm.
an artist. Like, two things can be true. Like, don't let this one thing just define you. And where would you recommend people start just like looking for those passions and things to define themselves outside of their career, because it shouldn't make up their entire of their being.
Hmm. For most people I have talked to that don't have a creative outlet, a lot of the times I'll ask them like, okay, why don't you have one, or what would it take for you to want to have one? And most of them say that they're not good at it, or they've already put up the block because they're like, oh, I can't paint, I'm not a great painter, I can't write because I'm not a great writer, I can't do this. I don't think you need to be good at any of that to do any of it. Like you don't need to be good at, I think that's where most of people struggle with. If you just had the mindset of, I can do this and I don't have to be amazing at it, I don't have to turn it into a career, I don't have to have it be something that, I'm sharing and selling at an art fair or whatever it may be. But I think people's biggest block is truly that they think they have to be good at it in order to do it. I mean, I had some friends over here. I was just talking about this on a different podcast, but I had some friends over here a couple years ago to paint pumpkins, just
Mhm.
simple painting pumpkins for Halloween. You wouldn't believe how many of them sat there for so long being like, well, I don't know what to make because like yours all look so good and mine's not going to look good. I'm like, it's a pumpkin. Just put some paint. Like we don't need it. You're overthinking it too much. And I think that's the problem is if
Mhm.
you just let go of the idea of being perfect or good at something, you could find so many creative hobbies you would enjoy.
Yeah. And life's too short to not have joy outside of your work. And I think
Yes.
the world would probably be a much happier place if
Mm-hmm.
people did have those hobbies. And it's true. Like I feel called out because I'm like, I can't write this book because what if the book sucks? And I place so much time and energy in this idea and then it sucks. But it's like, no, just do it. Just do it.
Yeah. And that's the thing when I started, I definitely, if you read my first few books, they are awful. And I'm saying that from a perspective now where I'm like, wow, it was almost the opposite. I thought they were kind of good then. Like, I'm like, wow, I think I'm doing something here. No, they were really, really bad. But I had the mindset then of like, I think then I knew, okay, these aren't the best, but this is something I want to do. So I'm just going to do it. And I've always kind of been that person where I'm not a perfectionist in that aspect. I'm more of like, I want to just see things out, see things through and execute them. And even if they're terrible, I'll just tweak it after. Like, I'll just go back and fix things, or I'll learn from people's feedback and get better at it. But that's kind of been my whole career. Is I started in a place where probably writers don't usually start. I started sharing my work while I was also learning how to even write, because I didn't know how to write poetry basically until I started sharing writing poetry. It wasn't like, oh, I've been writing poetry for 10, 15 years and now I'm going to share it with you. It was more like, no, I just started writing this and I'm also going to share it.
I mean, I'm working on that. I'm working on getting there, because I say the same thing. The first couple episodes of the podcast, vastly different than where we're at today. The way the podcast used to look, vastly different. And I think that's something that's helped me too, is like getting comfortable with like the journey and appreciating like the journey of finding yourself, because it's more fun when you let yourself be a little carefree.
I agree.
Exactly. But before I let you go, where can people find you on socials, and where can they pre-order your book, Deep in My Feels, which is coming out, I believe, August 12th, if I remember correctly?
Yes, August 12th. So I'm on all the social media at Jennae Cecelia, and then my book is available for pre-order right now. My publisher has told me to say everywhere books are sold. So that's just what I keep saying. So they're like Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Books A Million. I know some of like, if you're not in the US, it may take a while for it to show up on there. I guess that's what I've learned, is that it takes a little while. But yeah, wherever you get books. And then once it comes out, it'll be in bookstores again, wherever you buy your books typically.
Amazing. Well, I can't thank you enough for joining me for this episode, for this conversation, for sharing your poetry with the world. I think it's so special. And, obviously I'm very glad that the poem took off and brought everyone to your work.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you having me on.
Of course. And guys, please follow Jennae, pre-order her book, give her a follow, whatever you got to do to help support her and her career. She is so wonderful. And if you don't already follow the podcast, we are on Instagram at Not the Girl Next Door Podcast. Obviously, leave us a 5-star review wherever you're listening. Make sure you're subscribed to the YouTube. And I will see you guys next week for another episode.